Living here in the United States is kind of a privilege that we have. It's something that we can really enjoy the freedoms that we have in this country. And people often ask, like, how are we contributing? What are we giving back to the country for everything that we're receiving from our host, from the place that we get to live in freedom and prosperity? Throughout the ages, the Jews have lived in many different countries, and perhaps we didn't have the same level of freedoms. We didn't have the same ability to serve God and to live our lives in our own way. And for that, we are thankful. We do appreciate that very much. Today's lesson, we're going to talk about how we, as a nation, as a Jewish nation, we contribute to our homeland, to the place where we live as well. And so let's go back to this week's Torah portion, all the way back to our forefather Jacob, Yaakov Avinu, who was living at that time in a foreign land. He was living in the home of his father-in-law, Laban, right? His father-in-law and his uncle, Laban, in Haran. So as the story goes, Yaakov traveled to his uncle, to Laban, and his father-in-law, that wasn't his father-in-law. His uncle said to him, he says, he would put him to work over there. He was working amongst the sheep, and then his uncle says, well, what can I do to pay you? How can I pay you for the work that you're doing? So Yaakov says, I'll make you a deal. I want to marry your daughter. I will work for you for 7 years, and then I will marry your daughter as my payment. Laban agrees, but Laban was a swindler. Instead of giving him the daughter that he wanted, he gave him a different daughter. He gave him Leah instead of Rachel. And when Yaakov came complaining, he says, okay, you can marry Rachel and work for another 7 years. So we got another 7 years of work out of Yaakov. Yaakov works for 14 years, hard labor, working every day, every night. He describes it as he never got to sleep properly one night the entire time. 14 years are finally completed. Yaakov has finished his work contract with his now father-in-law Laban, and so he tells him, okay, it's been great. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful doing business. It's time for me to go home. It's time for me to head back, take my wife and children. By this time, he already had 11 children, 11 sons. He had daughters as well. At least one daughter. Some people say he had an additional 11 daughters as well. Either way, he had many children at this point. He says, let me take my wives and my children and head home. I've completed my contract. I've done everything I need to do here. But Laban says to him, he says, please don't leave. I'd like you to stay. Laban said to him, as the verse says, if I have found favor in your eyes, I have divined that God has blessed me because of you. He says, I have done my, his witchcraft and his ways of looking at the stars or whatever he was doing. And he says, I see that God blessed me because of you. I received many blessings because you were here. And so I'd like you to remain here, to stay with me so I can continue to receive these blessings that I'm receiving because of you. What were these blessings? What is he referring to? So Rashi tells us, the blessing is that previously Laban did not have any sons. He had 2 daughters, and he had no sons. But after Yaakov came, and Yaakov lived with him and worked for him for these 14 years, God blessed Laban with sons. And in his divinations, he came out, he realized that the blessing came because of Yaakov. And so he says to Yaakov, he says to Jacob, please don't leave me. I'm receiving blessings for you. I want those blessings. I want you to be here. Stay with me. This is how Rashi explains it. But if we look in the Zohar gives a different explanation. The Zohar says, sons are beautiful, but that's not what Laban was so excited about. That's not what Laban was so happy to have Yaakov there with him. The blessings that Laban is referring to are actually financial blessings. Right now we're talking Laban's language. It's all about the money. Laban was talking about that his finances were doing much better with Yaakov's presence. And we see an interesting argument. The first opinion says that while Yaakov was there at Laban's home, working with Laban's sheep, Laban's profits went up. He got an additional 100 sheep and 100 goats were born every single month. Every month he had an additional 100 goats, 100 sheep being born amongst his flock. Fantastic. He's growing. He's getting so many more animals. But a second opinion, Rabbi Abba, says no. It's not 100 sheep and 100 goats. It was 1,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. That's how much he was growing. That's how much he was getting blessings from having Yaakov there in his presence. An amazing blessing. Another 1,000 sheep and another 1,000 goats coming every single month. He was getting he was becoming rich. He was winning the lottery every month. This is a discussion in the Zohar. Now, we mentioned previously the Lubavitcher Rebbe's father. His name was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. He was a very great and holy and mystical scholar, and he was a Kabbalist. And he would often analyze specifically things in the Zohar. Now, the truth is, he's also written a lot not connected to the Zohar, but most of his writings was actually lost in the Soviet Union. We don't have most of his writings, but we do have his writings on the Zohar. So these are the things that we have, generally, the things that he writes about the Zohar. But he was a Kabbalist. And so he writes as follows. He explains this machlokas, this argument that we find in the Zohar of whether Yaakov's blessing brought an additional 100 goats and sheep every month or an additional 1,000 goats and sheep every month to his father-in-law Laban. And he says, the truth is, it's not really an argument. This is not two opinions. One says this and one says that, and they're arguing back and forth. Rather, they're both agreeing with each other. They're just adding on to each other. They're looking at it from a different perspective. Each one is giving you a different perspective of it. And he explains as follows. Remember, we're talking Kabbalistic. So he explains that they're looking at it from a different perspective. One is the perspective of Chachma, and the other is the perspective of Bina. Let's explain those two words. Chachma means wisdom. Bina means understanding. What's the difference between wisdom and understanding? They sound very similar. Wisdom is the flash of lightning. It's the light bulb going off. It's the idea. It's the concept. It's like the wow moment. It's the eureka. It's that excitement when a new idea comes in and it's like, boing, like the lights turn on. That is Chachma. Bina, understanding, is not the flash of lightning. This is where the hard work comes in. This is where you start to develop the idea. You take the concept, you take that bolt of lightning, and you start to figure out how exactly do I make this happen? What do I do? What does it really mean to take this idea and make it practical and make it all work? So this is, Chachma is the idea. Bina is the developed idea where it becomes something that is actually usable. It's something that actually has a practicality to it. So looking at Chachma and Bina, which one is a higher level? Which one is greater? The bolt of lightning, the idea, or the understanding, the developed idea? So if we look in Kabbalah, we in Chassidut as well, we map out the 10 Sfirot, and the way we map out the Sfirot, Chachma is on the top, Bina is under Chachma. Chachma is above. Chachma is a more, it's a more spiritual level. It's a unrefined, undeveloped concept. Bina is something that we understand. We've worked on it. We've developed. We thought about it. But it's more grounded. It's more based on reality, based on practicality. And so when you look at Chachma and Bina, Chachma is a higher level because Chachma is beyond understanding. It's beyond the natural order, the normal way of things working. Bina is a developed idea within the natural order. And so when we look at this, going back to the blessings that Lavan received from the presence of Yaakov, if you look at it from a level of bina, of understanding, now you're talking about something that's practical, something that's within the realm of possibility. That's bina. That's 100 sheep, 100 goats. A great blessing. But let's be practical. Come on. 100 is a great number. It's very nice. You're doing very well. You get 100 goats, 100 sheep. You had a great month. And every month has been a great year. It's been fantastic. Business is booming. It's a blessing. It's fantastic. But it makes sense. Sometimes you can have a great year. Things can be doing very well. This is 14 years. So it's obviously a blessing. It's obviously something spiritual, but it's within the realm of possibility. When you start looking at it from a viewpoint of chachma, you start looking at it from a viewpoint of spirituality, of above understanding, beyond the realm of possibility. Now animals can fly. Now anything can happen. Now you're getting 1,000 goats, 1,000 sheep. The numbers are flying. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. Nobody has such a good month. 1,000 animals every single month. This is not something, this is not just a normal blessing. This is a blessing of the deepest level beyond normal concepts and levels of understanding. And so this is how Rabbi Abba says, Rabbi Abba says, let's not look at it from a viewpoint of Binah. Let's look from a viewpoint of Chachma, which is a much higher, deeper spiritual level of looking at blessings and receiving blessings from God. This is the teaching of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, the father of the Rebbe. Very deep, very philosophical, very interesting. It's, you can talk about this for hours and get into the depth and understanding, but as much as Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was a Kabbalist, someone who was focused on the deep concepts, these deep ideas, in a way, his son, the Rebbe, was the exact opposite. The Rebbe also spoke about very deep concepts. The Rebbe also talked about very deep spiritual ideas. But the Rebbe's next step was always, what does that mean practically for me? A deep spiritual concept is very nice in theory. But how does that help me in my own spiritual journey? How does that help me in my own development, my own experience of doing mitzvot, of doing what I need to do in my relationship with God? That's what it's all about. And so the Rebbe says, hold on a second. You're telling me these beautiful spiritual concepts. You're talking about how, the Chachma and the Binah and the 100 and the 1,000, very nice. But what does that mean practically? Why do I have to know, first of all, the whole concept of 100 sheep or 1,000 sheep? Who cares? You got a blessing. Who cares how many animals you got? And then to start explaining to me that it comes from Chachma and it comes from Binah, how does that help me in my spiritual journey? That is the Rebbe's question. And so let's take a step back and let's see what is this blessing all about in the first place. Why did Lavan get a blessing just because Yaakov was there? Why should he be blessed? What did he do to deserve a blessing? What are we saying here? And so there's a concept in Judaism in general that we have that as Jews, we need to bring blessings to the community, to the places where we live. We actually have an obligation to bless the government of the countries where we live, to pray for their welfare. We learned this from the prophet Jeremiah. Prophet Jeremiah, this is right before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. He sent a message to the Jewish community that was living in Babylon at the time. Many Jews were already exiled over to Babylon. There were some Jews still in the land of Israel. They were about to be exiled as well. Jeremiah sent a message to the people in Babylon, and he told them, listen here, you're going to be there for a while. You should know, you're not coming home so fast. They were thinking, this is temporary. We're going to be able to go back home. He says, no. Get comfortable. Build houses, get married, get families, live your life, do what you need to do there. Eventually you'll come home. Don't worry, you'll go home, but not so fast. Meanwhile, you have to keep living in Babylon, go through your life, do the things you need to do, plant gardens, go to business, whatever you have to do. And while you are there, and this is the key point, while you are there, while you're living in Babylon, seek the peace of the city where I have exiled you, and pray for it to God, for in its peace you shall have peace. Jeremiah told the people, you are living in Babylon, they're actually the enemy. They're the ones that exiled the Jewish people to Babylon. They're your enemies, yet you are living there amongst them, you are living in their midst. You need to pray for their welfare, because through them doing well, you'll do well as well. Your peace is dependent on their peace. And so you need to pray for your host country. And this is something that has continued throughout our history. That whenever the Jewish people lived in a foreign land, which is pretty much almost always, unfortunately, they always prayed for the welfare of their host country where they were. They always prayed for the well-being of the people that they lived. And this is what was going on by Jacob as well, by Yaakov. Yaakov living in Laban's home, living in Laban's place, not in a Jewish land. He knew that he has to pray for the welfare of his host. He had to pray for Laban to do well. And that's where the blessings were coming from. Why was Laban having such a good financial time? Why was he getting these blessings, receiving all these new animals that were coming to him? This prosperity that he was experiencing was because Yaakov was praying for him. Because Yaakov knew that it's an obligation to pray for your host country, to pray for the people that you come from. Now, when we talk about blessings, there are two levels of blessings. You have a blessing that comes within the realm of understanding, a blessing that comes from the level of Bina, a level that makes sense, it's dressed in norms, a blessing that follows the natural order. This is a blessing of 100 sheep. But then you have a deeper blessing, which comes from the quality of wisdom, a blessing that comes from beyond natural, normal ways of doing things. It surpasses the natural order. It's a deeper level. This is talking about a blessing of 1,000 new sheep, 1,000 new goats. This is a blessing that is beyond the normal realm of possibility. And so the same thing when the Jewish people are in another country, when we are in a place, when we are in a land that is not our own, it's not our home, we have to pray for the welfare, for the good of that country. And we have, again, there are two ways that they can receive the blessings. They can receive the blessings in a way that follows the natural order, or they can receive the blessings in a way that is beyond the natural order. Because the truth is, blessings beyond the natural order is not limited to the Jewish people. This is something that applies. Everybody can have great blessings. You don't have to be Jewish to receive great blessings beyond natural order. How do we know this? Well, let's look in the Torah. There are examples in the Torah. One example that we know is when Yaakov traveled to the land of Egypt after his son Yosef made it to Egypt, and Yosef eventually became the ruler of Egypt. And the brothers came, and the whole thing where he first he was mean to them. Eventually, he told them who he was, and he told them, "Bring my father, bring father down to Egypt, and let him live here. Let me take care of him." And finally, Yaakov traveled to Egypt to be with his son Yosef, and Yosef took his father and brought him to greet the king, to visit with Pharaoh, the great Pharaoh. Yaakov comes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh starts asking him, "How old are you?" And they have a whole conversation. And then the Torah says that Yaakov blessed Pharaoh and then left. What was the blessing that Yaakov gave to Pharaoh on his departure? So Rashi right away tells us, what was the blessing? The blessing was that, a very special blessing, that every time Pharaoh would walk up to the Nile River, in Egypt at that time, there was no rain. It didn't rain. How would they water the crops? It all came from the Nile. So they made these little canals throughout the entire Egypt. There was these canals coming from the Nile, and they had to take water from the Nile and water their crops. And here Yaakov gave a very special blessing to Pharaoh, that every time Pharaoh would walk up to the banks of the Nile River, the water would rise up towards Pharaoh. It would overflow into all these canals. The water would overflow, and the water would overflow onto all the fields and water the crops in all the fields. An amazing blessing. Pharaoh held the key to the entire prosperity of the nation. He was able to just walk over to the water and have the waters overflow. The water would rise up towards him, which is something that's beyond anything natural. It's not a natural phenomenon. This is something supernatural, that the water rises up to Pharaoh. And here we see Pharaoh, being not Jewish, was able to receive this blessing from Yaakov. And so you don't have to be Jewish to see supernatural powers, to have supernatural blessings coming your way. Everyone can receive supernatural blessings. And this idea continues wherever we see our great tzaddikim of the previous generations, as they traveled, as they ended up in different places, in different lands. We see again and again how they prayed for their people, for the nation where they lived, and they brought not just any blessings, they brought supernatural blessings to the lands. We have Yaakov by Laban, as we're talking about here. Yaakov was living with Laban, and Laban got great blessings. Wonderful blessings coming to him because Yaakov was there and praying for him. And we have that when Joseph traveled to Egypt, before he became the second to the king in Egypt, he was first a slave. He was a slave in the home of Potiphar. And in the home of Potiphar, it says that he had great success. And there was great prosperity in the home, to the point that they elevated him to be the manager of the whole home. Why? Because the Torah says God blessed the Egyptian's household on the account of Joseph. He received special blessings because Joseph was there. Joseph's presence brought Joseph to pray for his host, so that his host had tremendous blessings because he was there. We see again with Yaakov. Before Yaakov traveled to Egypt, what was going on in Egypt? There was a famine. They were in the middle of a famine. The famine was meant to be, as we know from the story of Yosef with the 7 cows, it was meant to be for 7 years. And yet, this was only 2 years into the famine when Yaakov arrived in the land of Egypt. As soon as Yaakov arrived, the famine ended. 5 years early. After only 2 years of famine, it was over, and the rains returned. It didn't rain, but the crops started to grow again, and things went back to normal after just 2 years. Why? Because Yaakov arrived in the land. Yaakov's presence in the land brought the blessings. Because when a holy person comes to a land, he brings the blessings with him, and he translates those blessings over to the people of the land where he has moved, where he has arrived. And this has been the custom for generations. It's something you still see in some places today. Not everybody does this today, but in some places it's still done. Where in the morning prayers on Shabbat, after the reading of the Torah, before the prayer at the end, the Musaf prayer, they actually say a blessing, a prayer for the host country. And I've seen this in many shuls myself. I've been to different communities around the world, in England, South Africa, Australia, and around the United States, Canada. And I've seen in many shuls, in many synagogues, they still do this prayer till today, where they do a special prayer in the shul, in the service, a prayer for the welfare of the nation where they're living. As a matter of fact, there's an old Chabad custom as well. Today it's not usually done for different reasons, but it was the case here as well, where in the original Chabad Siddur, which was written by the Alter Rebbe, he wrote a prayer there, And here's the prayer. Here is a part. I'm going to read the whole thing. I'll read part of that prayer that the Alter Rebbe wrote in his Siddur back then. He who grants salvation to kings and reign to princes, whose kingship is upon all the worlds, who rescues his servant David from the deadly sword. May he forge a path through the ocean and the raging waters. Bless, protect, guard, help, exalt, increase, and elevate our master, Feivel Petrovich, the son. Yeah, here, okay, they translate a little funny here. That's why I'm a little stuck on here. But in the original, he writes as follows: "And elevate our master, Pavel Petrovich, may his glory be exalted." Because Petrovich is his father's name. Father was Peter. May the King of Kings in his mercy preserve and protect him from all distress, hardship, and harm, and save him and deliver nations under his feet. May his enemies fall before him, and may he succeed at every turn. May the King of Kings in his mercy place in his heart and in the heart of his council and ministers compassion to do good for us and all the Jewish people in his days and in our days. May Judah see salvation and Israel rest securely. May the Redeemer come to Zion. So may it be your will, and let us say Amen. And so we see here, the Alter Rebbe wrote a prayer for the Tsar. Right? If anybody's ever seen Fiddler on the Roof, you know, when they asked the rabbi the question, how do you pray for the Tsar? He says, we pray that that God should keep the Tsar far away from us, which is a very nice concept. Very true as well. The Jewish people didn't really want to get very close with the Tsar, but at the same time, they did pray for his well-being. They did pray for the good of the country where they lived. In more recent times, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe arrived in the United States at the beginning of World War II. When he arrived in the United States, he was very grateful to the United States for not only taking him in, but for taking in many Jewish people at that time, and they were helping many people and helping throughout the war. And he actually wrote a prayer as well. He wrote a special prayer to be read in the synagogues on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in all the synagogues around the United States at that time. Here is the prayer that was written by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. Our God and God of our fathers, great, mighty, and revered God, we beseech thee in thy abundant mercy, restore the world unto its true basis, under the guidance of kings and rulers who shall reign with justice and righteousness, without the term discrimination between nation and nation, race and race. We beseech thee, O merciful and gracious God, guide our illustrious President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who thou hast chosen leader of these United States. Strengthen and encourage him and his honorable ministers and councilors of state, and the honorable representatives of the citizens in both houses of Congress. Bless their efforts to save this land and the neighboring lands from war and destruction, and wheresoever they turn in their cause of humanity and in behalf of this land and for the benefit of thy people Israel, send the angels of blessing and success to welcome them and cause war and its calamities to be ended, and an era of peace and justice with its blessings to begin, even in their and our days. We beseech thee, O merciful God, inscribe our gracious President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his ministers and counselors and all dwellers of this land and the neighboring lands and the lands afar, which are fighting in the cause of justice and righteousness, unto a happy, blessed, and successful new year. This was the prayer that was written by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe for the president and for the nation of his host country where he was living at this time, and thanking them and blessing and praying for them that everything should go well. And so we see that the nations around, the nations where we live, the nations of our host countries receive blessings. We give them blessings when we live in their lands, whether we're reading such a prayer or just being there. And there are two levels to these blessings. There is, as we said, there's blessings in a natural way, and there's blessings in a deeper, higher level beyond the natural order of things. And they're receiving blessings in both of these ways. As the Rebbe points out, if you look throughout history, the Jewish people have moved from country to country. And every time the Jews were living, the majority of the Jewish people were living in one nation under one ruler, that nation, that ruler, was a superpower. The Jewish people, the majority of the Jewish people have always lived in the superpower country of that time. And we see this if we look through history. If you look all the way back to the kingdoms of the Nebuchadnezzar and Achashverosh, going back to the Babylonian and Persian empires, where they were the leaders, the rulers of the world, and the Jewish people were living under their realms. And you have this when the Jewish people were living in Spain. At the time when many Jews lived in Spain, Spain was a superpower. It was the Spanish government was doing very well financially and in geopolitical powers. It was a very strong nation at that time, where most of the Jews were living under their jurisdiction of the Spanish. And then what happened? The Spanish expelled the Jews from Spain. As soon as they started expelling the Jews from Spain, their power started to diminish. It started to get less. And they started to dwindle to the point today, who thinks of Spain as a world superpower? Spain is not anything important today because they lost the Jewish nation. They lost the key to their success. As a matter of fact, after the expulsion, where did the Jews go? Many Jews ended up under the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And what happened once the Jews started coming to the Ottoman Empire? The Sultan realized that the blessings started to come in. He realized that the Jewish people that were coming in were successful, educated people that were able to accomplish great things. And he saw the blessings coming right away, to the point that he said at that time, trying to find the exact quote, he said at that time that the Spanish were stupid. Bayezid publicly mocked the decision of Ferdinand and Isabella to expel the Jews. To his court officials, he would say that Ferdinand was not wise at all, since he impoverished his own kingdom while enriching the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan realized he was receiving great blessings from the Jewish people coming to his lands. So he sent out messages to all of his lands, letting them know, open your doors wide, let the Jews in. Let them come. They're only going to bring blessings and good things to us, which is what happened. And the Ottoman Empire grew in strength and in prosperity, and in political levels. It became a great empire because they were able to receive all these Jewish people that were coming in. When the Jewish people lived in Russia, Russia was the world superpower. And then what happened? The Jews left Russia. They came to the United States, and now the United States became a world superpower. And we see this throughout our history. Wherever the Jewish people end up, the nation where we live receives blessings, receives goodness from our presence, from our being there. Because we pray for them, we bless them, and we give our blessings to our host countries, to the nations, and they in turn receive blessings both in the natural order and in the supernatural, beyond the normal ways. They grow in ways beyond measure. Now, as we know, everything that happens in this world is all from God. God orchestrates things around the world. He orchestrates what happens with the Jewish people and in general with the world. And so when the Jewish people end up in a different location, where things happen, where things cause the Jewish people to end up in another nation, it's not really by choice. It's because that's how God felt it should be. That's where God moved the chess pieces on the board. You would think that when the Jews left Russia, they should all have gone to Israel. Or after World War II, when things were settling down, the majority of the Jewish people should have moved to the land of Israel, and that should have become the world superpower at the time. But God did not choose that. God rather chose that we should end up in other places. Specifically, in the United States, became a very strong Jewish community here in the United States, causing the United States to become the world superpower. And this is how God moves the pieces on the chessboard. We don't always understand. In fact, we hardly ever understand. But this is how it's meant to be. And so when God brings us here, we have to pray for our host country. We have to hope for the good of the country, do everything we can to help our country to make sure that it's able to continue to prosper and do well as long as we are here. And somebody asked a question about this. What happens when things go south? Where it comes to the point where the United States ends up in a, a war with the state with Israel. Where do we where does our loyalty land? If the United States were to be in a fight with Israel, which side are we meant to be loyal to? So this question was asked of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Someone asked her about this, about what happens if the United States and Israel were to be in a fight. Where would the Jewish loyalty lie at that time? And she said, if that were to ever happen, if there were ever to be a time where the United States and Israel didn't get along to the point where it was an actual fight going on, at that point, we would no longer have a place here in the United States. If that would ever come to be, we wouldn't have a place here anymore. There wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be a question of loyalty because we wouldn't belong here anymore at that time. And that's a very true point. It's a very valid point. Because if the United States is not a place for Jews, if it becomes a place where Jews can't reside, can't be the majority of the Jews here in the United States, then the value of the United States goes down. And the blessings, the prosperity of the United States will go down as well. And that's when we'd see a new superpower emerging and things would change in the geopolitics of it as well. So, what is the lesson for us from this class? What's our message? Our message perhaps is that we need to remember who we are. We have to have pride in who we are as a Jewish nation. We have to be thankful. We have to appreciate our host countries. We have to give them blessings and pray for their success. But at the same time, we have to remember that that success comes because of who we are. Not despite of who we are, but because of who we are. So we have to stand proud. Remember that we are a distinct nation, that we are the Jewish people, wherever we may end up. And we have to bring our blessings and success to our host country as we are, who we are, not in spite of who we are. And that is our message for today. Thank you all for joining.